Okay, so if today's brew day for you, you should have already done a few things. First of all, you must have already chosen a style of beer that you want to make. And to do that, I have a number of books myself. I buy every book that I can. Anytime I walk into a store and I see a style that I've never tried or a clone book or whatever, I just collect them because it's nice to have for reference. Beyond that, the internet's a great resource. And even beyond that, a lot of us have brewing software. I personally have one called Beersmith. It's just what my local brew store happen to have. There's another one called Beer Tools that a lot of guys use. Bobby from New Jersey, I know, shows Beer Tools in his videos. It looks very cool. But basically, you can start to plug in your recipes, and instead of having to brew your beers and find out what colors they come out to be and what alcohol content they're going to be, and there's a lot of calculations involved in, especially in all grain brewing, as far as grain to water ratios and things like this, to actually find out where you should infuse, what you should mash out it. There's a lot of just math you can save yourself from having to do with the brewing software. And again, especially with the color thing, if you've been involved in competitions before and maybe you had a judge split some hairs on exactly what SRM your beer was hitting, it's nice to be able to go on here and find out exactly what your beer is going to look like months before it's finished, so you can save yourself the time and effort of, well, failing basically at a style. So also too, we talked this in another video, make starters. For sure, make starters. Don't just use OY yeast smack pack. Take the couple extra days to get yourself ready to properly inoculate your beer. So if you've done all these things, then you should be moving on to basic brewing practices, which we're going to do in the second part here. Okay, so the first thing you're going to have to do to make an all-grain batch of beer is, of course, pull together your grain. In my case, I like to buy 55-pound sacks of base malt. I really like to use Marris Otter 2-row. It's a pale malt imported from the UK. It's supposed to be a better malt than American 2-rows are. Lately, and even with other UK malts, people have been complaining that Marris Otter isn't as good as it has been in years past. Just this year's, I've noticed, isn't as sweet and nutty as it was last year. And again, kind of like with grapes for wine, depending on where malt was grown, the climatic conditions, the soil conditions, how much rain they got, how much sun they got, it's going to be different every single year. So you can't necessarily blame the maltster, but what you can do is seek out the best malt available, whoever it's from. So you should do that. And when you find a good one, it is a good idea to buy it in bulk if you can. It'll save you a lot of money per pound when you're actually starting to stockpile things for future beers. I just went out and got myself one of these Rubbermaid Roughneck storage totes. I'll buy a 55-pound sack of malt, whether it's a Pilsner malt. During the winter I make a lot of lagered beers because it's cold and I can actually store them in my basement. During the summers I'm making a lot of my ales, which I'd want to drink in the winter, so you make your stouts during the summer, which seems counterintuitive, but you're kind of rotating out your beer stock. So get yourself a decent kitchen scale. If you're in the Midwest, I actually just got this one at Farm and Fleet. Is on clearance in their kitchen supply section. You can calibrate these, so make sure it's zeroed out. If it's not zeroed out, of course your measurements are going to be way off. In my case, for whatever reason, it just so happens that one of these 2.5 cup measuring cups seems to be exactly 1 pound. So I know that every single full one of these that I dump into my bucket is going to be 1 pound. For this particular recipe we're making today, I need 9 pounds of base malt. So I could use 9 of these, but just to be on the safe side, I like to go ahead and weigh each one. And if you're a little heavy-handed, that's okay. As long as you make note that you are kind of dumping in a little extra malt. I know my beers could always use a little extra push. We're always kind of pushing the envelope, but if you are putting in extra malt as you're pouring, just make sure you make a note of that so you can repeat your results. So we're going to go ahead and measure out our grain here, bring it upstairs, and I'm going to show you guys how to actually grist that down. Okay, so now we're upstairs and we're pretty much ready to start putting our grist together for mashing. So basically what we've done is we've started our strike water already. In this case we're going to be mashing in with about 3.5 gallons of water. Now remember that the grain is going to suck up about 1 gallon of water inside of the ton. Now once you get to know your own system, you'll know if you have any dead spots or not. A lot of guys use mash tuns that have what's called a false bottom on it, where you're actually having a screen that is above an area where the wort actually drains away from. And sometimes there's dead pockets in there where wort gets stuck, so when you're actually mashing out, you're losing additional quantities of water. So if this is your first time brewing through, don't really have any expectations, because there's nobody in the world that's really going to be able to tell you exactly what's going to happen. In my case, it's pretty efficient. I'm just using a cooler like a lot of guys are, and I really don't have any dead spots. But I do lose a good gallon of water to the grain itself. So if I mash in with 3.5 gallons, I'm not going to expect to get more than 2.5 gallons back out. And from there, if you're going to be boiling for 90 minutes, remember, you're boiling off about a half an hour, or a half gallon every half hour. So 1 gallon of water will boil off every hour of boil time on a turkey fryer. Okay, so you can use those numbers to calculate exactly how much sparge water you're going to need, and we'll get to that point. But basically, you want to start heating up your water now because it does take a long time. And in this particular recipe, which I'll include in the information, we're going to be mashing in at 170 degrees. My ton will eat up 10 degrees of water just when we add the strike water to it. And then once you add the grain eats about another 10 degrees too. So if you start at 170, it's going to take you all the way down to 150. Now, when you're looking at what temperature you want to mash at, you got to remember, the lower the temperature is, the more fermentable sugar will be available to the yeast once you've completed your work. The higher the temperature is, the more or less fermentable sugar there is. So what you're going to end up with is a sweeter beer and a less alcoholic beer, whereas if you drop that temperature down a bit, you're going to get the maximum alcohol concentration that you can get. Okay, so talking about the grain a little bit, I use what's called a Corona mill. Okay, a lot of guys have these dual roller mills that connect to a drill and they just zip right through. In my case, if you take a look at this, you can actually remove the handle and you can get a chuck for a power drill. You could actually, if you wanted to, screw the drill piece in there, attach the chuck to your drill, and just zip it right through the way you would. This is probably the only exercise I'm getting right now, so I'm just fine doing it myself. But basically what's going on here is you have an adjustable mill, which to me is important because different grains break up to different sizes. If you have black patent malt, which has been kilned to like 500 degrees, so it's totally charred through, that stuff shatters like glass. I mean, you could literally like push on it and it'll shatter. So it doesn't grind to the same coarseness that, say, like this 2-row will. This 2-row is going to hold together relatively well. Now, basic grinding ideology here is what you have is grain, that actually grows on the stalk of a plant and creates like a seed, okay? On the outside you have a hull, and on the inside you have what's called the endosperm. The idea is you're breaking open the outer hull, you're cracking that endosperm so it can be exposed to water, but you're not pulverizing all of this into flour. Okay, the reason you don't want to do that is when you go to mash, you don't want all that grain hull getting mixed in with everything else, okay? There's something called tannins inside of the grain hull, and that's just going to produce bitter off flavors. If you were to boil all this down and leave it all together, your beer would be very, very bitter, okay? And that's not what you want. You want it to be as sweet as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start grinding this. And again, on a Corona mill, this front piece will control how fine or coarse the grind is. It might take you a little while to actually figure out where your particular model is. And again, the different grain sizes and different kiln temperatures will determine how the grain reacts when it is ground. So in our case, and I'll walk some of this over to the camera, you're getting this, okay? You can clearly see some kind of floury stuff, you can clearly see some kind of chunks, but what you're really seeing too is a lot of these big, nice pieces of grain hull. Okay, so the endosperm is totally broken open. We're going to get a nice sugar conversion. Remember now, this is stored as starch at this point, and when we expose it to the hot water, that's when you actually have what's called sacharification, and that's what actually converts the starch into sugar, which is what we actually want. And then these pieces of the grain hull will settle down in the bottom of the water tun and actually create a nice filter bed, so they'll actually keep other particles of grain hull out. So this is what you're looking for, and then depending on how much malt you have, you're going to be doing a whole lot of this for a long time. So stay tuned for the next part and we'll show you what happens next. So we've heated up our strike water to 170 degrees. We're going to go ahead and add it to the ton. And of course make sure the ball valve is closed before you do this. And again, there's nothing in here except the manifold. The manifold is on the bottom. Don't forget to put that in, of course. And then we're going to go ahead and close this up and just let it start to heat up. Now, when we actually dough in, which is going to happen next, we're going to go ahead and wrap the blanket, or wrap the water tun in blankets. You can see it's kind of steaming out a little bit. The seal's been getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. I made a lot of beer in this here cooler. So, yeah. Basically, when you see other people in videos wrapping their tun in blankets, don't skip that. Even the first time I made a beer in this cooler, I remember touching it and I couldn't feel any heat at all. It actually felt cool on the outside. And then when I opened it up at some point to stir it and stuck in a thermometer, it lost a significant amount of temperature already, and it really does make a big difference. So don't skip that. We're going to let this bad Oscar heat up for a minute. We're going to dough in, and then I'll show you how all that works.